All right, good morning, everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair knows otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices in the background. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Matt Fee, I don't see on the screen at the moment. Ian Golden.
Yes, here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Chris McClure.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Thank you. And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And a welcome to Morgan Sale, the Coastal Resources Technician for the town of Nantucket. Morgan's not anticipated as a speaker on the agenda, so we'll let her go with a virtual hello. We also have Trevor Johnson joining us from Arcadis, a member of the project team for the Coastal Resilience Plan. Good morning, Trevor.
Morning, everybody. Here.
Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute yourself on your phone or computer when you are not speaking. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. I see Matt Fee has joined us. Matt, you want to give us a quick hello this morning?
Hello this morning.
I feel like an early morning too, Matt. All right.
I've been up for a while.
Yeah. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from December 7th. Vince, do you want to go ahead and put those up on the screen? Do we have any comments or revisions to the meeting minutes?
If I may, Mary, just a couple of very minor things. I put in the link as I usually do because it's not available by the time Fritz sends it to me because he's very quick at getting these to me.
Thank you.
I just made one word change down below to add Youth Climate Committee.
Those are all quite reasonable. Thank you, Vince. Any other comments or alterations to the meeting minutes? Seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have a second?
Second.
Was that Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
Joanna Roach. Joanna?
Sorry, aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. All right, our next item is an update on coastal resilience activities from Vince. Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm just going to pop the agenda up if that's okay, please. Just so that everyone can see the order I'm going to discuss these things in. Okay, Can everyone see my screen and see the agenda and the 3 updates that I'm talking about?
I see it.
Perfect, thank you. So, okay, hopefully I'm not going to bore everyone to tears today. I have a fair few points and a fair few little bits to discuss today. The first I'm going to talk about is the Baxter Erode Erosion Control Project. So last Wednesday at Select Board, the board approved a contract with Arcadis for an NOI, Notice of Intent is what that stands for. I'm going to be the project manager on that project. The town is going to partner with SBPF to look at a new extension to the geotube system. We're going to have to do a substantial review and understand what might be involved in it. The town is then ultimately going to pursue an NOI, Notice of Intent, through the CONCOM as well as Mass DEP, as you'd expect, to undertake this project. I'm the project manager, so it looks like I'm going to be the one presenting the NOI to CONCOM when it comes around. There's going to be quite a lot to get ready in this. SBPF have gifted the cash for this effort to the town, so this isn't costing us anything other than staff time, so to speak. That's the main one. Going hand in hand with that project in some ways, even though it's its own distinct and separate project, is a Baxter Road relocation planning. I'm involved in this as well, though it's quite obvious that the Natural Resources Department aren't an organization like the DPW where we can hand it off to a set person there. There's massive staffing problems. So the way that this is going to work is there's going to be a group of people. I think there's about 3 or 4 of us involved. I think it's myself, Libby, Ken Beauregard are the main ones working on this one at the moment. And we're trying to recruit 1 or 2 more people in to get this effort off the ground. This is going to be substantial, and it's going to be probably 2 phases. There's going to be a northern phase and a southern phase. The northern phase would probably be the far more necessary part to have that constructed in the near future, or once we hit one of the failure criteria, like the road edge comes within 25 feet of the bluff edge, and then we would have to then pursue construction. It kind of comes down to when will this be needed? Don't know, but having it as an exceptionally good backup plan and a shovel-ready project is what we would anticipate. This is on the Select Board agenda for tomorrow night. They're the kind of 2 big ones. Mary, would you like me to pause to take questions on those 2 before I go into the next one?
Yes, thanks, Vince. Does anybody have questions for Vince on that update of those 2 projects regarding Baxter Road? Gary?
Yes, Vince, I was very glad to see that second item. I'm glad to see that there's an equal emphasis on the planning of the relocation of the road and not just worrying about the geotubes. Let me ask you this, is Arcadis going to help at all with the second item, or is it just the geotube part?
So for the road relocation, the contract that's on the cards for Select Board for tomorrow night is with Arcadis again. They're basically doing both.
Good, oh great.
As distinct and separate projects.
You know, there's a possibility of a little linkage here, and let me just tell you what I was thinking about. To the extent that the Baxter Road relocation planning requires some permissions from some of the owners of property where the relocation is going to take place, those are the same folks who are going to get the benefit from the addition and the elongation of the geotube. So I would assume that they should be cooperative in providing the necessary easements that the town will need for the road planning if they're going to be able to also get some additional protection temporarily with the geotube. I hope someone understands that. I would hate to see some of the people be very difficult with the town as far as relocation, road planning, and get the benefit of the geotube extension.
Very fair point. I don't want to take away from what Matt might say, but this has been something that's mentioned in quite a few planning meetings to this point. So yes, that is a well made and well understood point.
Great, great.
Peter also had a comment.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chairwoman, to Gary Beller. This was a thing that was already agreed upon way back when the first attempt to move the road. So that should already be on the books somewhere, some iteration of that. It shouldn't be something new to the Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund to, give up easements.
Thank you, Peter. Further comments?
Yeah,
Sarah?
this is Matt.
Okay, Matt and then Sarah.
I'll go to Sarah, then I'll come in after. That's fine.
Okay, my question was with both of the projects. Is there a role for CRAC in any of this in terms of commenting? I think obviously the erosion control project is like a very specific type of project, and the road relocation is also very specific to location, but because it kind of fits in with the rest of the resiliency plan, and there's going to be a lot more road relocations and things. I'm just wondering if you foresee any role for the committee.
Good question. So this came out of not so much the CRP, rather the other project that CRAC was a stakeholder in that we did last summer for Baxter Road. So this is following on from the recommendations within that for the road relocation. The easiest way I can describe the other part for the NOI is that's kind of an extension of the much greater and much longer, almost 30-year history of bluff protection. So it's within that. That's kind of a pretty set group at this point. I think one of the best ways that CRAC could be involved is to add comment when it goes to CONCOM. I think that's probably one of the most straightforward ways of doing it.
Thank you, Vincent. Back to Matt.
Yeah, I'll go to Peter's point first. The northern end, there were agreements that were put in place for the northern end. They were put in place and placed on individuals, one which is sold. So some of that still may need to be renegotiated. None of the southern end negotiations have been undertaken. And part of, and now to Gary's point, so no, it is not shovel ready. There's still some work to be done on the northern end even. And then on Gary's point, I would hope that if people are gaining benefit, that they are, doing this willingly. There's some indication that some of them may not be, which is kind of why I've been saying we've got to tie all these together and find a sustainable funding source that the neighbors are part of. And so we've got to use the leverage that we have now with the neighbors wanting this to get them to all agree to this. If we go out fighting them tooth and nail, then we're going to fight every one of these easements, every one of these takings. It'll take us 20 years. If we can figure out how to do this in a cooperative manner, which is what we're trying to do, then, and we agree on what, if we agree on what makes sense and what the triggers are, and we agree on what we're doing after that, if we could do that cooperatively, that becomes a great framework for other areas. And so that, that's the mindset right now, is how do we do this? Address the CONCOM concerns, address the public concerns, address the neighborhood concerns, and find a way to do this. That's what we're trying to do at this point.
Thank you, Matt. Further comments or questions? Fritz.
Yes, could you just define north end versus south end? Is it Bayberry, whatever that road is now? What's the first crossroad?
Yeah, that's it's sometimes taken as north of Bayberry and south of Bayberry. Other times it's taken of north of the existing geotube and south of the existing geotube. So north, there's somewhat more erosion, and then south of it, there's other structures in place on the beach, and other protections in place, and less erosion. Is that fair to say, Ian? I don't mean to specifically call on Ian because he's on CONCOM, but he might have a better definition.
Well, yes, where the current geotubes are is where there was as much erosion as anywhere else. And in sort of adding on Peter's comment, the DEP's superseding order of conditions in 2013 gave the town 3 years to relocate the road. So you could say that the town has been dragging its heels in some way for 8 years. And there have been numerous presentations before Concom over the years to what extent hard armoring is damaging to the natural environment. So I would caution the town in particular to feel that this is going to be a slam dunk. And if you were asking my opinion, I would say that one should focus on relocating the road. Thank you.
Yes, just a reminder, we're not at a Concom hearing right now.
No.
Thank you, Ian, for
Thank
that
you.
additional context.
Mary,
Okay.
Matt
Yeah,
again.
Matt,
Yeah,
go ahead.
in the north and the south, when I think about it, I think of north as, you know, if we have to close the road, if we hit the 25 mark, or if we remove it and you remove protection, there's a breach at some point. You know, I think how do those homes north of that breach, how do they access, where as a town, we're required to provide them access. We're required to give them a road. We're required to give them utilities, et cetera. How do we provide that? So that's what we've been looking at. And that's what the negotiations, and they took a long time in the first round in 2013 to get the golf course had to agree. The neighbors had to agree. We set prices for where the road would go through on the north. It was, months and months of negotiation to get two neighbors and the golf course on board for this. It was very difficult. So the southern end is a lot bigger beast. And so the work that's going to have to do when we look at this, let's say that we all agree tomorrow it has to be moved and there was no negotiation, we're just moving it. Best case scenario for the southern right now, we're 5 or 10 years out. This is going to take a long time. There's, not even counting staffing issues, et cetera. You've got to get people to agree and not fight all the different takings. The landowners, there's all sorts of Concom issues and wetlands issues and all sorts of other stuff that has to be done. So I think anyone that thinks that we're going to do this quickly, or even that thinks that the timeline that Arcadis laid out is going to be met, I think is going to be disappointed. I don't see how we're going to, they've laid a timeline out for road relocation. I don't see how we're going to do that, especially if it becomes confrontational, especially if a lot of the neighbors there start saying, no, you can't do that. We aren't doing that. We've had some people that have already sent letters in saying, if you want to put a road behind my property to serve my property, you've taken the value of my property. Therefore, you need to take the whole thing. And we're not going to give you the road for free or for, $500,000. We want our full value of our property. There's some neighbors that have already sort of had that as their starting point. So everyone should be realistic that this is not, this is not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen it's not going to happen quickly. So.
Again, I'm going to say thank you, Matt, for that additional context. But to Sarah's question, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, I don't think has any role in negotiating with homeowners, doesn't have any role in the Concom's deliberations other than projects where we are identified as a stakeholder and that role. So I don't want to stray too far into the details of those projects. The point of this agenda item is for Vince to let us know what's going on, not for us to get involved in it where we don't have a role. Jen, thank you for waiting. Go ahead.
No worries at all. Thank you, Mary. My question, I think it kind of is a little bit similar to what Sarah's asking, maybe as far as the crack role. But I was wondering, Vince, and maybe you don't have the answer to this yet, but it's clear that the public can have a voice and follow the process of the GEO2 project through the Concom. But I'm wondering how the public can follow the process with the road relocation, as far as figuring out when to comment, when to know what's going on, you know, whether that's, is it, because it's not entirely just a Concom application process. So is it the select board? And maybe that's information we as CRAC could provide to the public at another meeting, you know, if you want to follow the process of this project, here's where you can
Yeah.
and then comment.
So the kind of most basic part of the answer that is the input has already been received. The road relocation in the two phases for the northern end and the southern end of the road relocation is exactly what was shown in the Baxter Road report that came out in September. There's no real alteration to that. So it's just implementing that as a recommendation. So then once it comes to, I don't know, the Concom process, just for the sake of argument, that'll be posted like any other meeting. As that develops, it's just following that basic recommendation. I suppose that's the most easy way I could put it. Does that make sense?
Jed, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, that makes sense, Vince. I think it was just looking for that clarity of if people wanted to follow it, what is the regulatory piece? Because I'm not clear if all of the road relocation would trigger Concom review or not. And if that's, you know, if as you're going through the process, maybe and see where those places are that it's hitting regulatory review, we can mention it at a meeting so people know where to go.
Okay, I've no problem keeping people up to date on this process.
Yeah.
And as things are coming due for applications and when there's planning applications going in, I'll just keep people up to date. That work?
Thank you, Vince. Okay, can we let Vince move on to the next update?
Okay, I'm going to share screen again. So the next one is on Nrd updates, and there's a thing in the in the packet for select board for tonight. It was posted last week. This is it. Hopefully people can see my screen again. Yeah, can you see it, Mary? Just a thumbs up will do. Perfect. So there's 3 new positions coming up in Natural Resources Department. The sustainability manager is probably the biggest one. This was something that came from the strategic plan in 2019. Hopefully, if this gets approved, it's the kind of thing that would probably get advertised. I'm not sure. This is a question for Jeff, but I should imagine after town meeting, probably in early July. I couldn't say for certain. That's a department head question that I can't comment on. We're also looking for a new conservation agent. So you may remember that we had an office manager here who was also a conservation agent together with Jeff Carlson. That was Joanne Dodd. She went on to bigger and better things last August. So that was quite an expansive role. And the best way of dealing with that is to have an office manager, which we're hoping to fill within the next couple of weeks, months. But we also realized the need due to ever increasing amounts of Concom applications that we need a dedicated conservation agent. So that's something that we're going to try and have that as a proper carve out. And that's someone who can take over many of the responsibilities, work hand in hand with Jeff as the conservation agent. The third position is one I'm personally very excited about. It's going to be a joint position between Natural Resources Department and the Health and Human Services Department. We're co-located in the same building, and we both have the same problem of not being able to get enough public relations information out there. You've got a lot of very busy staff trying to do Facebook posts, trying to put leaflets together, do all kinds of things that we could do better if we had a person that was just dedicated to that kind of job. So this will be part-time in each department, but for a full-time position. That's about the simplest way I could put it. This is something I could have used throughout the CRP because it was one of those things that I took on and tried to get as much info out as I could. But this is the position that could really help get more information out about coastal resilience and get us community support and leverage as we need projects, as projects are coming closer to being planned. Any questions on those three?
I'll just say I'm excited that the additional staff positions are being proposed. You know, as we've seen, it's hard for the town to get things done without staff, and it's really great to see more staff in the Natural Resources Department, in particular the public outreach specialist, which is near and dear to my heart as well. Any other comments or questions for Vince on the new positions? Gary?
It just seems to me that each of these three new positions should be extremely familiar with our coastal resiliency plan, and in effect be kind of, in some ways, our ambassadors to make sure that as they're involved in whatever their particular duties are, they are keeping one focus on the CRP, because the two are they're all so related. So I look upon it as three new additions to Vince's staff, in a way, at least part-time, to help us get our goals accomplished.
Thank you, Gary. Peter?
Yeah, Vince, can you say what the sustainability manager is going to do? It says initial activities of this office include organizing and advancing the work of a proposed core sustainability work group. It's the whole paragraph is vague, so if you just
So the basic outline is that it would be someone who could drive forward every sustainability project. That would be everything from the Coastal Resilience Plan, Climate Action Plan, to some extent solid waste and recycling. So that would probably be a position that would be superior to where I am at the moment, and that the Coastal Resilience Coordinator would have inline reporting to, and other departments would have dotted line reporting to. So somebody to basically drive every sustainability project.
Thank you, Vince. Other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we can move to the next item on the agenda, which is a discussion of grant application planning. As I mentioned, Trevor Johnson is here to participate in that discussion. We do still have the remainder of the Coastal Resilience Plan funds allocated to grant planning. So this is a continuation of that effort. Vince is going to give us an update on opportunities for grants.
Hopefully people won't get bored of the sound of my voice. And please, there's a lot in this now. So feel free to stop me throughout or save questions for the end, whatever people are comfortable with. So this isn't comprehensive. This is as much as I could get onto a handful of slides in about a day and a half. I could have kept going on this, but I tried to just also realize that I had to present this in about 10 minutes or so. I don't have long for this. So this is an overview, and I'm going to do two examples, one state and one federal. So just to talk about the state ones, first of all, we're already quite familiar, and people talk a lot about the MVP system. I'm going to go into more detail on this later, but just to understand that there's kind of two basic sides to it. There's a planning grant side and an action grant side to it. Then we have CZM, which stands for the Office of Coastal Zone Management. They've got their own grants, but they also oversee coastal resilience grant programs, and they also oversee things like the coastal pollution remediation grants. I'm only mentioning that because that's something NRD is interested in and could have knock-on benefits for coastal resilience. Then also at the state level, we have MEMA, the kind of, would it be fair to say, the cousin of FEMA, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, and they have their own granting system for, I think they're called remediation grants and safety grants, that kind of thing, to deal with things like from HMP type projects, has a mitigation plan. So then at the federal level, we've got FEMA. It oversees the BRIC grants, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Grants. It also has something that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Also at the federal level, we've got NOAA. They have a couple of different things, the National Coastal Resilience Fund, and also an organization within NOAA called Sea Grant that has grants that coastal resiliency can easily apply to. But federal grants are difficult to manage. The EPA has an organization called the Southeast New England program, and they have their watershed implementation grants and other types of grants as well, but they pretty much focus on watersheds. Local level, so to speak, we've got lots of these on Ireland, many worth mentioning. I could have made this into a hell of a long list. So we got a lot of private organizations and philanthropies. Remain, they shouldn't have Nantucket philanthropy there. That's an edit I should have taken out. I apologize. 2 yacht clubs that have given money in the past. PIN, Nantucket Land Council, Nantucket Shellfish Association. I could have kept going with this and even included NBI to a lesser extent. Just worth mentioning because there's a few members on here, including myself. Off island, there's a handful of organizations, mostly universities, but I kind of wanted to call out that there's just one as kind of an example of a national organization, national philanthropy, Coastal Communities Foundation. I've come across them a couple of times. They have pretty substantial grants sometimes, but I've not seen many implemented, but just an example of national level. So I'm going to go
Let
through.
me pause for a minute, Vince. If there are other grant-making organizations, by all means, make sure that Vince is aware of them. Particularly those of you working in the conservation space. If you know of anything, just let's keep the feelers out there to find any sources that we can. I also wanted to add, there's a potential for transportation grants in some of our projects, so something to keep in mind as well. Thank you, Vince. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just going to go over the kind of state level MVP type grants just to kind of give a bit of an overview of those because we're all very interested in those. And I know that we're going to be potentially looking at one in the very near future. And that's part of the discussion for today and hopefully something Trevor may be able to weigh in on as well. So MVP just does 2 types of grants. They do planning grants and action grants. MVP planning grants offer funding to municipalities that wish to assess their vulnerability and to prepare for climate change impacts, build community resilience and become MVP communities. Nantucket is an MVP community, so we're pretty much there. Then the action grants is open to municipalities who have completed the MVP planning process and invest in municipal priorities that build resilience. Projects can range from vulnerability assessment of specific sector to outreach and engagement campaign to constructing green infrastructure that take into account climate change projections. They are very keen on best available data. And this is something that we're going to have a discussion on after Select Board accepts the CRP. And we can start looking at CRAC implementing sections and us changing to the MCFRM. That would be the best available data for us here. Okay, so MVP has 9 core principles. These core principles are used when they grade them, the projects. So if people want to read them, or I can just quickly skim through it. I'll just quickly skim through it. Furthering a community's identified priority action to address climate change impacts. We have many of those in the CRP. So once you can show that it's in the CRP, that's great. If it's something that's in the CRP that you can also link back to another finding from another report, say the HMP, that adds to it as well. That's a pretty nice thing to do. Utilizing climate change data for a proactive solution. I think this committee is pretty into that idea, just by virtue of the fact we're here. Employing nature-based solutions, increasing equitable outcomes for and supporting strong partnership with environmental justice. Environmental justice is becoming a very big thing. And one of the big environmental justice things to bear in mind for Nantucket is access to water, among other things. Conduct robust community engagement, and that is huge. Community outreach and community engagement through the planning process gets you a lot of points, basically. Achieve broad and municipal community benefits. If we can even say things that are layered and will have future benefits, that is a big plus too. Utilizing regional solutions towards regional benefits. Nantucket has traditionally fallen down on that one because we're an island. Pursuing innovative and transferable approaches. I think this committee has basically had that as an ongoing subtopic for the longest time since the first meetings. So I think this is one of the reasons why MVP is probably so attractive to us. I just want to go over some of the basic timelines and structures for MVP and the dates that we already do know for 2021 and what they've outlined in their application process for what we need to know and the kind of key timelines. So the early expression of interest is due for the 21st of January. The expressions of interest in general close on the 14th of February. There is priority given to people who do the early expression of interest. The request for responses usually comes out where they're anticipating for the end of March, early April. And here they usually give about 6 weeks, but this does have variation in it. So we'd be looking at about a 6-week window coming up to the end of May, maybe early June. They've also done extensions in the past. Grants usually get awarded in August. Then there's the requirements that the town has to fulfill. 25% match, that's in dollar terms, but it can also be in-kind services that have a dollar accumulation. So staff time can go towards that. Grants usually range from, this is just to give people an idea what it does and give an understanding of the expectation. Like we're not going to get, it's very unlikely we get $1 million grant basically, but they do grants in terms of tens of thousands of dollars, $80,000, $90,000, low hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then every once in a while, they come out with a grant in and around $1 million. But that's an occasional thing maybe Nantucket should be aiming for. Grants require extensive management and monthly reporting. From talking to Chuck and others in the past, the management of these grants is more than a part-time job. It becomes very labor intensive, so that if we did win one of these, it would take pretty much a long time and a lot of my time or whoever's time to maintain the requirements so that we could keep the reporting go back to the state. Usually they only give one grant to a community and they don't even give grants to every community, not even close. There's about 78 eligible coastal communities in Nantucket, but this extends beyond the 78 coastal communities, and we're up against every municipality in the state for this. And they are competitive to say the least. And by further explaining this, they usually put out a metric, usually in a report in August when they say who's been awarded grants. They say something along the lines, this is very much just very basic info here. They usually say something like, oh, we received about $50+ million in grant applications. I think 2 years ago it was about 38. Last year it was 40 something. So I put 50+ in as kind of a round number. But they only have a pot of money of usually around 4 to 8 million. It was around 4, they went up to 8. I'm expecting this year it's about the same. I have no real idea, but they don't really tell you that in advance. So that's kind of an overview of the MVP system and the requirements that go along with it. I'm going to go over break at the moment next, and I have to acknowledge that these slides came from Arcadis and thank them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had time to get this presentation together.
Let's take a quick pause. Any questions or comments for Vince on the MVP in particular? Gary?
Gary's muted.
Gary, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. With respect to Vince, with respect to the MVP process to which you referred, are we planning, or shouldn't we plan to get something in between January 21? I assume tomorrow the select board will approve the CRP, and it looks to me like if we could get our act together, we should get an application in between January 21 and February 14. Is that a realistic goal that we can shoot for? Because I hate to let a year go by when there is some opportunity here to get, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's a little less. What do you think, Vince?
So maybe I misexplained. The January 21st is for early expression of interest. That's just a kind of a simple 2-page form that's online. We could fill that out this afternoon if we wanted to. That, I have to say, is kind of, there's 2 problems to it. We first need to know that the select board supports the CRP. And the other part is what's in the next agenda item is what would we apply for? So that's, there's 5 things that are listed that would probably work. It's the next point on the agenda, and it's something for the committee to discuss. So I don't want to jump that gun.
Okay.
Yeah, good question, Gary, but hold that thought.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
so basically,
what we figure out.
I beg your pardon, Mary. So basically, just it's an early expression of interest. It's a very simple form. And then we wouldn't even see the request for proposals, request for responses until the end of March, early April. So we couldn't even begin to put the grant together until then. So we're doing good on time. Short, but good.
Thank you, Vince. All right, why don't you proceed with the federal level?
Yeah, before I do that, it's also just worth pointing out that fair enough, we're interested in pursuing it here. I also just must point out, even within natural resources and also within other town departments, there's other people interested in pursuing MVP grants as well. So there's not just competition between towns, there's internal competition. So Brick, and many thanks to Arcadis for these slides. So this is a wonderful system, but it requires a hell of a lot. So you must be able to, the project must be able to reduce and eliminate risk and damage for future natural hazard. Hurricanes are a big one in this, by the way. Cost benefit effectiveness, you must do a BCA, that's a requirement. And I've seen some of the ones that have come from Arcadis in the past, they're terrific. It also requires a 25% match. These usually much bigger grants. So when we talk about a 25% match for this, you end up needing more cash. And this is the kind of thing that the town has to have, that cash to be able to support it, otherwise we lose the grant. So that if you're talking about a large project, this is what these are for, at the federal level, you're talking many millions, maybe tens of millions. And if the town suddenly finds itself being awarded for this, and I haven't gone through town admin to say that, well, I'm going for this, we might need to have the match in place for this. I can't. We need to have a good streamline and a good understanding for that match ahead of time. I know we can write off some staff time and other things, that's fine, but it's still going to be, these are expensive grants to apply for. Just they give a hell of a lot of benefit, but we just have to understand that one. Meet all environmental and historic preservation requirements. That's something that Nantucket is very big on. Conform to either of the last two consensus-based codes, fine. Sub-applicants must have HMPs in place to be eligible. So the next point that I can probably go on to understand this more easily is this is, again, a massive points system. I initially saw these 3 slides in a presentation that Arcadis gave, and understanding how this point system works and how you can gain points, and where, more importantly, you have to put parts in to win points and not lose points in your application is tricky. And you have to be so careful about it. So these grant applications is not something you can do in an evening. These can take months to write, if that's not an unfair assessment. Like trying to understand the technical criteria that's involved, that are involved, and also the evaluation criteria, so the qualitative evaluation criteria are massive. Even simple things like understanding the outreach and the partnerships that might be involved in them. Say if we're talking about something sort of, I don't know, code 2, picking an idea, something that comes up here, crack regularly, that would, you can quickly understand that there's multiple partnerships that are involved, and how that might have to work. Like we'd have to go through NCF, TTOR, probably because there's a federal structure on Grey Point, you'd also have to get Coast Guard involved. If not the federal lights involved as well. So it kind of gets large and cumbersome quite quickly. Mary, I see Sarah has a hand up.
Sarah, your question?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yeah, thank you. Through Mary, I think this is all really useful information as we move forward in the process, but I think I kind of was hoping to take a step back. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn for the committee, but I think it would be more helpful as a committee member to understand which projects we're going for, what things we're prioritizing. Because while it's really useful to understand for us, like where the grant opportunities are, the different funding opportunities, we've already been told the crack committee aren't the ones that are going to be writing the grants. Like, so we can help identify funding opportunities and understand which ones are more, like through Vince, all the work that you're doing, it's really helpful for you to tell us which ones are better off for the federal or state or different types of funding. But in the interest of time, I'm wondering if we could like talk more about, while we have Arcadis here, what the actual projects are that we're going to be pushing forward. Or maybe I'm missing a piece of going through all the different grant opportunities.
But yeah, our agenda was first the update from Vince, and second, decide what project we are going to recommend to move forward with Arcadis on. So again, hold that thought. It's definitely on the agenda for discussion today as soon as Vince finishes his presentation.
Thank you. And
Okay.
Mary, if I might.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole point is to rationalize expectation and not say that all grants are easy. I'm trying to also instill the idea that there's a lot of work in grants. Early on in the project, I was getting a lot of emails from people saying, oh, we should apply for this grant and that grant. And those are the emails I'm actually going back and finding now to try and put this together for today. So again, this is part of the whole stepwise process. So, but also you hit a very important point, Sarah. It's matching them up. It's no point in saying, oh, we should try and go for a federal grant for, say, a small project for downtown. That's not how it works. We'd be better off getting a very large project for downtown, or for CO2 for a very large project, that the multi-million-dollar projects. Whereas state and local philanthropies are much more suited to the smaller projects. And there's going to be a heck of a lot of those along the way. I thought I saw Ian had his hand up, Mary.
Yeah, I saw that. I also wanted to add, just because we apply for a grant doesn't mean we get it, which, it'd be nice if we could say, you just pick and say, oh, we'll take that money, please. So we do need to understand the landscape and how difficult and what the consequences are. And I appreciate Vince bringing all this information. Ian?
Oh, just that, well, I'm sympathetic to Sarah's perspective, and I think she probably knows a lot more about this than I do. One of the advantages of Zoom calls is that while Vince has been presenting this, I've been on my iPad going through the MVP criteria. And right now I'm reading about the environmental justice policy, which I had absolutely no inkling about. So from this point, from my perspective, this is extremely helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other comments before we go ahead? All right, Vince, why don't you continue?
Sure thing. So there's only one slide left on this, and it's about application options and how BRIC works. There's the BRIC application process where you need about 30% design to be more competitive. Then there's the phased applications, which is something we might look at for the downtown. That's kind of where I'm interested in, the phased application, to do, say, a planning part and then move from like a planning part to get to 10% concept to 30% to 60% for design and shovel ready and application ready to 90%. So there might be very many applications before we could get to, say, the downtown flood barrier. Just putting that out there. That's another point for there. That's also where the project scoping application comes in. And this, having completed that, it allows you to get into a different funding stream and a different pot of money to be able to get projects off the ground a little bit faster. Then there's the hazard mitigation grant program. This is massive. There's billions in this one, but it's divided up, and there's going to be a state allocation. We're going to need that we're going to see that first before we can understand what we can apply for there. I will obviously acknowledge that Arcadis is the author of this, and if Trevor wants to mention anything that I've missed, I would like to provide him with an opportunity.
Trevor, any comments?
No, I don't think that I would. Vince covered, this information really well. I would just stress a couple things. Mary, your point that these are competitive. I think we want to stress that as much as possible. There is no guarantee of funding, and it's really important that we match up projects with grant programs for which those projects will be most competitive. So we want to be thinking really strategically, both about, the project that goes forward, that might go forward through the MVP versus BRIC, for the sake of example. And then once we sort of match up the applications, we also want to make sure the projects to different programs, I should say, we also want to make sure that we're writing these applications as competitively as possible, looking really closely at the evaluation criteria for each of these applications, and writing a proposal and matching the kind of scope of that project to those evaluation criteria. So that takes quite a bit of care and attention as you develop, as many in this committee know, from probably a lot of experience in writing grant applications. Timing really matters here. The state action grants, the sort of letters of inquiry portal is open now. Vince mentioned, those are due through the first phase for prioritization for state review in the next couple of weeks. And then the formal kind of request for responses is usually published in the early spring. And we'll learn more about kind of the availability of funding at that time and the timeline for submission. Federal grants, usually the RFR for BRIC applications is released over the summer, and then those applications are due around the new year or around the holidays of the following year. So next year's BRIC cycle will be due, around the end of the year 2022. Then for BRIC applications, there's a prolonged review period. It generally takes about a year before, if you are awarded, and BRIC is extremely competitive, it's a year before those funds are really released. So you're looking at, a 2 to 2.5 year time frame from application development through like sort of the awarding of funds. The state grants funds come through much more quickly. We have experienced in action grants that we're working on right now and have developed for other municipalities in Massachusetts, that generally those, you write the application, it's due sometime during the summer, generally at the end of June. Usually those funds are awarded in the kind of mid-fall timeframe, and then the project can, as soon as contracts are signed, kicked off shortly thereafter. So a much more sort of efficient time table from application submission to actually being able to begin the project. I think that covers it. Happy to answer any questions too, as we kind of get into the discussion here.
And Trevor, if I'm correct to say, Arcadis has experience in all of these grant forms and in having awards made successfully. Is that correct? Yeah.
So for MVP grants, we've helped a few of our client municipalities in Massachusetts with both development of planning grants as well as action grants. For BRIC, BRIC is a new program. This is only the second year that BRIC has existed. It was preceded by a different program called the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program that was similar in focus, but BRIC really is kind of version 2.0 and kind of the latest and greatest version of how federal funding is being channeled to resilience projects at the state and local level. So we're very much still learning. We did have, I believe, 7 or 8 successful BRIC applications in the first cycle of 2021. And I think we probably submitted many applications through BRIC this time. So we've learned a lot, and I think we've had a fair amount of success in developing these applications. The other thing I would just mention too is you've probably seen a lot of news about the Infrastructure and Jobs Act passed by Congress, just last year. Some of that money is going to be channeled into programs like BRIC. So when we hear about stimulus funding and trillions of dollars of funding become available for climate resilience, some of that money is going to go to federal and state agencies through those pathways, but a lot of that money is also going to flow through programs like BRIC. So that this is, not just this year, but in years ahead, this is going to be an opportunity for Nantucket to take advantage of those federal stimulus dollars that are intended for climate adaptation and resilience.
Thank you, Trevor. Other questions or comments? Ian?
Thank you, Mary. So in looking at the 2020 grants, but for flood control, utility infrastructure protection, elevation, acquisition, and relocation on their website. In the past, when I've been part of applying through a nonprofit I'm a member of for grants from Nantucket, we were always told Nantucket's a wealthy community, you know, what's your problem? And which was very disconcerting. And do you feel you're going to run into that aspect of applying? I know that's a hard question to quantify, but I wonder if you have any opinion on that. Thank you.
Is that for Trevor or for Vince?
It's for Trevor.
Okay.
Well, I assume you're talking about the MVP program.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Nantucket's already been awarded an MVP action grant. You know, the Resilient Nantucket Designs for Adaptation project was funded through the MVP program. So I would say that's a pretty good track record for the competitiveness of the community on those applications. You know, that project was complete, which, to Vince's point about the state, I think having, you know, I don't think they have a rule on this, but I think it seems to be the case that they're not issuing more than one action grant at a time to a municipality. You know, with the conclusion of that project, I think it does open up the ability to apply for others. And I would say also, you know, I think the reputation of Nantucket is as a resilient or as a wealthy community. That certainly is the case, but through the CRP process, you know, we also know that Nantucket is a diverse community, right? And that there are lots of folks who are not wealthy, who rely on, you know, Nantucket for survival. And so I think it behooves us then to make that case in the grant application. Like, that's part of the job, is to demonstrate how any project serves the interests of vulnerable populations.
Thank you,
Great.
Trevor.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Trevor.
Gary?
Another question perhaps for Trevor. I'm curious, when I see the COVID-19 grant reference there, I'm trying to think of how people can equate COVID-19. I know there's a lot of money sloshing around, 3.46 billion, according to your chart. What kind of impact does COVID-19 have on these kind of efforts that we're talking about?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, it is admittedly a little bit confusing. So that the HMG, that pot of money was allocated through the COVID-19 disaster. So let me back up. HMGP is a grant program that becomes available when there is a disaster declaration. Typically, you know, if you had a major natural disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake, you'd have a disaster declaration, right, for that event. So after Hurricane Sandy happened, there was a disaster declaration. A certain amount of funding was allocated through Congress, and then the HMGP grant application program became available to communities that were part of that disaster declaration. COVID-19 is different because it was a national disaster, right? So that money is available to all states and all communities across the country, which is not typically how that occurs. So it's called the COVID-19 funding relief package that's being released through HMGP. However, you know, the criteria under HMGP allow for mitigation of a variety of different types of hazards. So not just COVID-19 related hazards. We've seen, you know, traditionally the HMGP program really focuses on kind of nuts and bolts hazard mitigation programs. So there's a heavy emphasis on acquisition of properties and on kind of building elevations for residences. So kind of strategies like that when it comes to flood resilience is what HMGP has focused on traditionally. Yeah, so I wouldn't worry too much about the COVID-19 piece of that.
It sounds like somebody will be very creative and figure out a way to say, as a result of that, we really need some additional funding generally, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, further comments or questions? All right, so let's move on now to the question of what would get funded. So the Coastal Resilience Plan had 18 priority 1 recommendations. We did have a discussion in December about some of those. Some of them, of course, are internal and don't require grant funding. I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the list. So we had just this is all 18, just in the order they appeared on the Coastal Resilience Plan. The Coastal Resilience and Sustainability Interdepartmental Working Group, updating locally adopted sea level rise scenarios and best available flood hazard data, sediment sourcing and transport study, CO2 erosion management and dune resilience, Coastal Resilience and Sustainability Program, Department of Public Works Facility and Landfill Resilience, sediment budget, Nantucket road raising and bridge conversion, downtown neighborhood flood barrier, Tom Nevers Field erosion management pilot project, updates to the zoning bylaw, updates to the wetland ordinance and regulations, Surfside wastewater treatment facility dune restoration, Ames Avenue bridge resilience, Nantucket erosion management pilot and Ames Avenue bridge protection, Steamboat Wharf resilience, strategic retreat and relocation program, and community outreach on property owner resilience best practices. So those were the 18 priority 1 recommendations. As I said, some of them don't require that we go for a grant. They can be done within the town administration. I also want to make the point that the titles are a bit grand. So the recommendations are not necessarily that we do the entire project right away, but that we take the first step in the project. So many of these are definitely multi-year, multi-phase projects, but we're not saying that by making a priority 1 recommendation that we need to finish the project in a year's time, but we do need to start the process for some of these. So we'd had the discussion, Vince has 5 in particular on the agenda, which is on the screen. Does anybody want to start off the discussion again about what do you think would be appropriate to assign to Arcadis to help us develop a grant application? And Vince, if you want to make any comment about which grant would be most likely to go for. It sounds like the MVP grant is the soonest available, but the process for others might need to begin now in order to make their award deadlines. So perhaps let's start there.
So of the 5 that are on screen, there's a couple, I think we discussed these at a meeting in December as well. We outlined them on the day, but there's a couple of things to kind of bear in mind for some of these. So I'm just going to skip the downtown neighborhood flood barrier for a second and go straight on to raising Nantucket Road at First and Second Bridge. That's one that I'm particularly interested in. I'm getting feedback. Mary, I think you might have to.
Yeah, there's an echo there.
Morgan.
Matt, go ahead while they're being sorted out.
No, I think when I wrote notes earlier, Vince, when we were talking about MVP grants, one of the notes I wrote was improve existing projects, Nantucket or Pulpus bridges. You know, I thought if that money comes sooner and we have got some of this, you know, we've got Millie's Bridge, I think, you know, set up. Is there anything we should be doing now? And would someone give us a grant to do that now? You know, it's our, if those, because I look at those projects that is already, you know, in the pipeline and funded and mostly ready to go, you know, so if there's anything, so from that perspective, I think it may make a lot of sense.
I see your point. I think if I'm not wrong, Millie's Bridge was not a priority 1 in the CRP. I have to go back and check that. So that's also something that's going through DPW and is already kind of an existing project and something that they're undertaking together with Massasoit Bridge. They're dealing with both of those together. What I'd be interested in is more than any of these is the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. If I was to pick one and to try and get work on early, it's that one. I was going to talk about the other ones points, the 2, 3, 4, and 5. But if I had to go pick one today, that's the one I go for, the downtown neighborhood flood barrier, and then try and get a plan in place so that we could then have either another avenue for more state funding, or open up the door for much larger brick funding.
So just a quick clarification, Ames Avenue Bridge Resilience is priority 1, and is that Millie's Bridge? Okay. Is Ames Avenue
yes, that's
Bridge?
Millie's Bridge, yes.
Yeah, so that is
sorry, I was incorrect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Matt, and then we'll go to,
if I had to pick, my first choice is steamship flood downtown flood barrier and steamship to get that process started, because it's going to take a long time. But I'm looking at this from a, what we're doing already, making sure that we do it, that we don't have to spend the money twice, that we don't do it one way now and 20 years later find, geez, we should have raised it 4 more feet and, and made it a little longer, and have to redo the whole thing. So I just think that when, so anyway, that's sort of my thought process on some of these things that we know are close to being done or being started.
So I'm a little confused, Matt, and I apologize, Sarah, we're going to get to you. I understand that you're saying that we ought to do them right the first time, but I don't see necessarily a role for a grant application if those projects are already identified. So I'm a little confused about what you're asking for.
Well, what I'm asking is, have we tested them to make sure that they're, have we had, Arcadis or whoever look at them, and have we looked at them from a, from a sea level rise standpoint? And are we building them, sort of to the right level? And if we're not, what's the additional funds we need? And if there's additional funds, is that a good thing to go to MVP for? And say, hey, we've got this 3/4 funded. We need another quarter, and we're going to be all set on the, Sacagawap's going to be able to flow into the moors, or, or the Millie's Bridge, Millie's Bridge, or the, the 2 bridges at the Long Pond. Those are all going to be able to flow freely now. That type of thing is what I'm thinking.
Thank you for explaining the connection. I appreciate it. Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, what I had to say was sort of kind of taking it a step back. We're talking, as I understand it, and as it's on the agenda, of which projects we're not only prioritizing for action, but prioritizing to work with the money we have left for Arcadis. And so, just from my perspective, I would choose the ones that are maybe more difficult. So, I think I hear what Matt is saying about really like finalizing or finishing up what we have in the pipeline and kind of is already forward. But I think to use the Arcadis's expertise to like, it's exactly what Vince was saying, the kind of the downtown flood barrier piece, which is going to be really big. And so that was kind of one thought that I had personally, which is I would prefer to have Arcadis kind of take off a big chunk right away in that sense of prioritization. And then the only other thought I had was I can't remember from our discussion about these projects before. Are these all planning projects or any of these action projects? Because we also might want to divide it into those 2 priority groups, because there were action grants and there were planning grants. So that was just a second thought on that.
Thank you, Sarah. Vince, any comment on that? Question from Sarah?
Yes, so open to being corrected by Trevor, but because it's the MVP process, if we're trying to go through that first, it looks like she went downstairs. I beg your pardon. Busy up here today. The MVP process, it would probably be something more along the lines of an action grant, if that's not unfair to say, Trevor. That's the way it would appear to me, more than anything, because we're trying to take an action, move towards taking action. If it was a planning grant, type thing, I think we've already identified it. It's been done. It's already now known as an issue, so we don't have to do more categorization or too much more categorization anyway. That's the kind of thing that could be folded into an action grant. Is that about right, Trevor?
Yeah, sorry, it is a little bit confusing. So the 2 kind of tranches of money, planning and action available through MVP, just the money that's called planning, just disregard it. The town already has done the planning as defined by the MVP process. That was the community resilience building process, is the planning grant. Those are small grants of, between $10,000 and $30,000 that are no longer available. You've now satisfied those. You're an MVP community. You have access to the action grants. There's a wide range of project types that are eligible for action grants, which includes detailed planning, detailed feasibility, design planning, community engagement, all the way out to design, right? And implementation of the project. So action grant covers the kind of full spectrum of project implementation. For something like the downtown neighborhood flood barrier, which is a huge project that requires a lot of intensive study before we, put any shovels in the ground, an action grant there would be continuation of community engagement, more detailed technical feasibility analysis to get to, a more refined conceptual design that might be eligible for other kinds of grants programs like BRIC, right? Some of the projects like potentially, Nantucket Erode, they're closer to being kind of at the conceptual design stage, and it might actually be the next phase there, working through DPW and other ongoing projects is to, advance to like a 30% design or the kind of next stage of design. So these projects are at different levels of refinement, as you all know. And the question is, what's the next kind of chunk of work that we want to seek funding for as part of that implementation process? And then if I could respond to Matt's comments too, just briefly, I think one thing that's really important to do when writing a competitive grant application is there needs to be a good story, right? You can think of the state as almost like or a funder as kind of like an investor, right? They want to see that the work is going to really, the money is going to really have a value add to the community. So if you're writing a grant application, it seems like, well, Nantucket might already be doing this. They just need to make sure that it's designed consistent with the planning that they've already done. Why do they need additional funding to do that? I don't think that's going to be as competitive a story as where, you might have the downtown neighborhood flood barrier where you can say, we don't have money to do this right now, but this is going to be a hugely beneficial project to our community. And so we need the state's help to advance this work, which is urgent and necessary.
Thank you, Trevor. So I'm going to add a comment, then we'll go to Ian and then to Joanna. The projects, the next steps are given in more detail on pages 18 and 19 of the CRP. That's the expanded list, which says a little bit more information about each project. So I encourage everybody to refer back to that. The other thing is that my evaluation was focused on where do we have an existing problem? And again, I come to the Easy Street part of the downtown flood barrier concept, where we have flooding on a regular basis just from a high tide. And that's an issue with access to Steamboat Wharf. It's an issue for every single person on the island. It's an issue for off islands trying to get to the island. It's a major issue and a major story, to use Trevor's words, about how much of a positive impact work in that area could be. So that was my evaluation criteria. Ian.
Thank you, Mary. So you've taken the words out of my mouth, and without belaboring the obvious, it would seem to me that, I would hope the select board would focus on the downtown flood barrier and give it, the urgency that it needs. So it affects the most people and is going to be by far and away the most expensive. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Joanna and then Gary.
Thank you, Mary. I want to talk about what Ian just said, or Trevor, I'm sorry, Trevor just said about the telling the story piece of this, because I do think that we have to come up with some way to tell a compelling story that Nantucket needs this help. And in the, sort of vernacular of the times, we need like a marketing deck that basically explains the situation that we're in and talks about all of the other things that are happening on Nantucket. And that kind of shows the context of this piece. I mean, this is not, I'll just give a couple of examples. For example, we have a $150 million budget. We have all of these other contexts that needs to be managed. We have $500,000 in CapEx projects. We have this entire socio-political issue around short-term housing. Like, we have to show a story that talks about the context and about why this is important and why we need this help. And I do think that that's probably the place for us to start, because if we can build that out and share that with the people who are going to apply for the grants, it will help them do it in a more expedient way because they'll already have the story developed.
Thank you, Joanna. Gary.
Well, just to continue at what I've been saying at past meetings, once again, I look at the CRP and I worry about the infrastructure. And so when I look at the list that Brent has, I certainly agree. Number one, downtown neighborhood flood barrier. Talk about infrastructure. That's the basis of our survival. Also, I take a look at number three, protection for sewer beds. That's also part of a very important part of our infrastructure. So when I think about where our priorities ought to be, that's what gets my attention. The flood barrier, the sewer beds, perhaps the stormwater management plan. Now we're talking about basic infrastructure that affects people all over the island. That's my comment.
Thank you, Gary. Further comments or questions from committee members? Peter and then Matt.
Yeah, this comment is directed toward Vince. Vince, I've written a few things in my life, and so if you need someone to help write that story when needed, I could certainly aid you in that.
Writing and editing, because I've seen you've been great at both, please.
Yep.
Thank you, Peter. And Matt.
Yeah, I'm trying to, a couple of points. I think, how do I say it? This is kind of, this is what we're talking about now is very difficult to do by committee. You know, when you look at this, there's a lot, you know, there's 18 things. And if you look at those, I think a lot of those need to be started pretty soon or right away. And I get worried that if we go with just the flood barrier as the number one and main thing, that'll be the focus and the other 17 will get dropped. And so I think what has to happen is when it goes to the select board, you know, from this committee or Vince or whoever's making the recommendation, you know, the story needs to be there and the, you know, and we need to, it's not just one thing. We need to make sure that they understand that, you know, that we need to be able to, you know, walk and talk at the same time. And so, so that's in one of the reasons I think about sort of the other bridges and things. When I've done fundraising, done nonprofit stuff, you have to show victories. You know, you have to build momentum. So however we do this, we want to be building momentum, not just have everything always be 5 years out, 3 years out. So if there's some small things that we can show, hey, that made an improvement, you know, hey, we did that and that was an improvement, that would start building the momentum that we need to have the public, you know, and maybe to have the people giving the, you know, giving the grants, fund the grants. So.
Thank you, Matt. I'll add, you know, the context for this discussion is specifically what should we ask Arcadis to help us write a grant application for? But that certainly is not to say that that will be the only activity or the only project that moves forward. I agree. We have to show that, you know, at least a majority of these 18 recommendations are, you know, underway in some form. And in some cases, that means partnerships with other departments or other agencies. It may mean, you know, some internal work where that's requested. I think we are showing with some of the new positions that the Natural Resources Department is requesting that we are moving towards some of the internal recommendations. So that I count that as a win, especially if these are approved through the budget and at town meeting. But yes, I think your point is well taken, Matt. We can't just do one. We have to keep working on all of it. Vince?
My comment would be, I guess, the town certainly, I mean, through the plan and the work that we've done, certainly focused on certain aspects, the bridges, raising of the roads, those the stormwater system and Brant Point. I mean, the town is kind of focused on that, and seems to me that we don't have direct control over the allocation of funds or the advancement of those projects. They're kind of in the hands of the town now, in my view. So I think we ought to put our money where we can decide what we think ought to be a priority, as opposed to having to convince the town or the select board that that's where they ought to be putting some money. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is, of all these projects, we could say to the town, oh, well, we think you ought to put X number of dollars into a consulting agreement to do further work, research and development on the downtown flood barrier. And they may look at something else. But with this particular pot of money, we have the ability to directly decide how to spend it, I think. So I think we ought to focus on what's the biggest priority to us as opposed to trying to convince somebody else it's the biggest priority. Am I making sense?
I think I'm following you, Fritz. I think what you're saying is that we have the rare for our committee opportunity to direct the spending of the remaining money in the Coastal Resilience Plan. And we should focus on what we think is the most important thing to do with that, as opposed to handing that off to somebody else to make the decision. Am I summarizing that correct? Okay.
Yep. Much more concise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz. Vince had a comment.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly address what Matt was saying. And he's right. I don't have infinite capacity, but I'm going to try and walk, chew gum, play football and climb stairs all at once and try and get as many projects underway as I can all at once. And I'm going to have to ask for more and more from this committee, and I'm going to have to try and build partnerships with more and more organizations. And there's a couple of key organizations that I have to call out every time that I'm going to have to call major players, like NCF. Just simply, that's the way it is. I want to try and get as much cooperation from those groups to try and assist getting projects off the ground as possible, and other departments as well. So it's going to be it's not a solo effort, it's a team effort. And I have to say that if there was there's already a lot of projects underway, and there's going to be more. But the kind of cornerstone project of the CRP, and the project that serves by far the most people and preserves the historic downtown and keeps our connection on and off island, is going to have to be around the steamship, and making sure that once you get on and off the steamship, you can have a road to drive on, and it's the downtown flood barrier. And I think that's kind of where our efforts should really be focused in a large way, but not let anything else go off the boil, and try and keep everything going at once. We must also remember in the CRP, there was phasing. There was phasing for how the project should be done. And we don't want to try and rush through 40 projects together. But we can certainly try and follow the phasing that has been recommended in the CRP, and try and keep as many going forward and in as timely a fashion as possible.
Thank you, Vince. Jen, you have a comment?
Okay, yes, thank you, Mary. By now, I think everyone's kind of echoed where I was going with my comments, and Mary and Vince, I think both said it really well. I am of the opinion that it makes a lot of sense to use this money now that we have to go towards a project that is more complicated, that we don't have input yet on, and that we can maybe really make some progress towards. And I think, you know, we all think of that downtown flood barrier. It's a little intimidating to think of what that project is eventually going to be. But I think that's partly why it's important now to use outside help to get us started on that process, because I think it's going to be a longer process and more complicated. I think the point, Mary, that you made about, you know, Easy Street now, you know, we're already seeing impacts out there. So if we kind of push the start of this project off a little more, because it's a larger project to get our hands around, we're going to end up being 5 years behind, and we're already seeing flooding at regular, you know, high tides when we've got low pressure systems. So my vote is to start working on the downtown, you know, neighborhood plan, and use that money, or the downtown flood barrier, and use that money to figure out how we progress that, and do it for, you know, implementation. And, you know, are there smaller scale steps that we can do in 5 years? And then how do we build in around private property? I will say, in addition to that, we've talked about a lot of different kinds of projects here, and mentioned that different projects already have some partnership, already have some action on them, already have maybe plans that are moving forward. And maybe something that would be useful, you know, and we've done small scale updates on some coastal resiliency projects, maybe something that would be useful for a further meeting, and to make sure we are showing that forward progress is happening on a lot of different fronts is to figure out how to summarize that in a way that we can present, these are the projects that are already happening on CO2 and what they look like, or, these are the projects that are already being discussed for Millie's Bridge or Pulpus Road, or just kind of where the status is on a lot of those things. For a future meeting, we might be able to pull that forward for presentation. And so we can keep pushing forward, because we don't want to lose track of everything else that needs to happen.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's a really good suggestion, and I will make a point on future agendas of bringing those projects back in. I can tell you that there are several that I'm involved with talking to other people about, or that I'm keeping up with what other people are doing. And I'll just use an example that Tom Nevers Field, we saw the new Park and Rec director. That was one of his first things to do, was to meet out there. And the Park and Rec Commission is actively reconsidering plans for Tom Nevers Field based on the results of the coastal resilience plan, pointing out the erosion potential there. So we are seeing that other departments are working coastal resilience into their plans. They're anticipating future issues as detailed in the coastal resilience plan, and they are actively looking to incorporate that feedback. So I count that as a win just from the start. Vince.
Super minor and super quick. The information on the Tom Nevers Field and the erosion there that we're likely to experience. I know that Charles has only been a week and a couple of days into the job. I've already sent it to him, and Morgan has already met with him on site the day he did that site visit. We're staying on top of this.
Thank you, Vince. Matt?
Yeah, the select board and the town staff is counting on this committee to, make recommendations, and it does listen to this committee. I mean, we've got, some of the comments, I think, had sort of sounded like they didn't. I think we're this committee is well respected and crucial for this. One of the we talked about having money. I think one of the recommendations that should come from us in one of the letters is to build a stabilization fund, a coastal resiliency stabilizations fund. So when we have free cash and there's money available, we put it aside. So when the time comes for these big projects, the money is there. So I think that, looking forward, that type of stuff we could be doing now, and that would fit right into the FinCom, right into the select board. But if we don't do that, if we don't think ahead those ways, then, we'll be struggling, and we'll be saying, well, we didn't have a grant, or we don't have money. Well, we can't do that yet. Let's wait till next year. I think that we can be proactive as a committee and get some money aside.
Thank you, Matt. Sarah?
Yeah, through Mary. Yeah, Matt, I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't know how that works within the town to have a fund like that, but I think it's a great suggestion. Because one of the things I was thinking about was, we're voting, or we're looking at these today to see where Arcadis can move forward with. But I think, to Matt's point of wanting to show progress, we're working on this in all different ways. And I think from like Jen's suggestion of having like a progress report or something like that, where it's like all the different stages of things that are happening, that kind of puts it together in one spot, to have like Arcadis working on this and trying to build a fund for the future. So there's different timelines of progress, I think is, really important. And I'm assuming, and I'm hoping, and I'm kind of pushing this in the next meeting too, is after we decide today, maybe if we vote on which project we're going to have Arcadis move forward with, that we're not like, okay, that's it for right now. Like, I think we're going to, we're like, then what's the next project, and what are the next grant opportunities? Where are the deadlines, And so I think part of what I was saying before too, about dividing the projects with planning and action, aren't just for the MVP. It's looking at all the projects that are in that top 18 and saying which ones are planning, like fit into a planning piece, and which ones are more action oriented, or like, so that when we go through all the grants, that both Vince showed, but then the other ones that we see and come across, like there were some fish and wildlife ones recently that were specific for stormwater, like so specific that we're like, oh yeah, we need that, we could, that, so that's just, one quick example, but I think organizing it like that will help us as we move forward, kind of keep stuff going on. And I think, I know that Pete, as an excellent writer, I have grant writing experience too. I'm happy to help where I can. I think within this group, we have a lot of experience with that too.
Thank you, Sarah. Peter and then Vince.
Yeah. I'm just wondering on Matt's comments about the select board really relying on us and supporting this committee. Do they support us to the extent that they will actually adopt the plan tomorrow night? Because I mean, 6 weeks ago, they're like, yeah, let's take 6 weeks, To me, sea level rise I can never say this word, as existential crisis of our lives that we're all alive today. To have a select board say, yeah, we need 6 weeks. It doesn't send a good message to me or their constituents. I'm just wondering, do we have them going forward?
Matt, do you want to respond before we
I'll
go to-
respond. Well, you'll find out tonight. But my point, Peter, is that some of the things we're gonna have to keep. We have to keep showing victories. From this group, and as in general, this group can't go, oh well, they didn't do what we want this time, so therefore we'll give up. Oh, that the funding problem isn't our problem, or oh, they did that bridge wrong. That's not our problem. We as a group, CRAC has to, speak up every time. Don't walk past a mistake is what I tell my employees. We as a group have to, not assume, oh, well, that was the select board's fault. We've got to be outspoken. I think they will support it tonight, is my guess. But I think we're going to have some really if I look ahead, when we start talking about best practices or zoning or whatever, those are going to be, or how we're going to pay for it, in various neighborhoods, those are going to be really hard discussions that we're going to have to, help shepherd and help, point the right direction, because people are going to want to give up. People are going to want to say, well, this really isn't going to happen. And I really don't have to pay $1,000 a year. It won't happen. We're going to have to shepherd some of this, because we know that, we've put the most time into this and know some of this stuff is going to happen. So I don't know if that answers you. We'll find out tonight. I tried last time.
So
You mean
it's
tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Tomorrow night, yeah.
Vince, and then we have a number of hands up. So everybody hang on till I get to you.
I'm going to defer to Gary because I'm going to bet a Coke he's going to say what I was going to say.
Right, Gary?
So what I'm going to say is that I don't want us as a committee to be confused about what Vince has before us. We're talking now about which projects we want to prioritize for Arcadis's help. Now recall, we only have a few dollars left from Arcadis's contract, 20,000 or 23,000, and we want to use them because of their sophisticated knowledge and expertise for the most complicated things. That's not to say that the other projects aren't important. And we shouldn't suggest to anyone that by voting now that Arcadis is going to focus on the downtown flood barrier, that we're making that the only priority. I think those 18 other projects are priorities. And we want to, if we want to, we can talk about number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Arcadis may only have the ability, and we need them to focus on the most sophisticated ones where their knowledge is so key, and we couldn't do it ourselves. But that shouldn't suggest to the town that some of the other items are not important priorities. The difference is we're going to have others, like people in our town offices and Vince and others, seek the grants for those. Right now, we're talking about where we want Arcadis to help us get the grants. And to me, that's pretty easy. Most of the people talking tonight have agreed it should be the most sophisticated, difficult project, which is the downtown flood barrier.
Thank you, Gary. And so everybody hang on for a minute. Vince, did you have any comment that you needed to add to that, or did Gary cover what you were going to say?
No, I was going to respond partly to Sarah. Gary had suggested before about having a quarterly report to the select board to keep us coming back to the select board and have something that could constantly be a reminder of what we're doing, where the wins are, what we're up to. That had been a previous suggestion of Gary's. That's where I thought he was going. Gary, I guess I owe you a Coke.
Okay, so
Good idea, Vince. I should remind people that it's good to have the select board give us a quarterly update once every quarter, how we're doing, and tell people from the town who are participating in the meeting, this is how our report, this is how we're doing so far.
okay, so does anyone have a comment specific to picking a project that Arcadis will help us develop a grant application for? Okay, Sarah and then Matt.
I just had a question for Trevor, actually. Not that this will totally sway us, but does Trevor, representing Arcadis, have input on the types of projects based on what we have kind of started to talk about?
Trevor?
Sure. I think this conversation, I think, has been going in the right direction with respect to thinking about the downtown barrier as a priority project, not to the exclusion of other priority projects, of course, but I think the point that this is a problem that exists today, that it does protect, it hits a number of the criteria that a funder is going to want to look at, right? It's protecting and serving critical infrastructure. It's a problem that exists today that will continue to exist in the future. It is a project that does need a lot more support and a lot more investigation before it can really proceed. I think something that hasn't been mentioned is that, we have enough information to show that this, through the CRP, that this is a cost-effective project, which is something that I think is going to increase its competitiveness across other projects that may not have that much information available at this stage of funding. So I think that's a priority project. I think, we would, Arcadis can lend a lot of our expertise towards scoping out and kind of telling a detailed story as to what the next steps there are and what a competitive scope of work would be for the state or another funder to support. There's lots of other priority projects, the CZM resilience grant program that Vince mentioned. This is a program that really focuses on things like dune restoration and ecological restoration. Those grants are released, I believe, in the spring as well. But there's many people in this committee and other folks at the town who I think would be very well qualified to write a very competitive and compelling grant application for a CZM grant, right? And I believe that has already happened at Sacajah Pond in previous cycles. So I think in terms of using our team and our kind of technical engineering expertise, that's where I would recommend our energies be this year. This is just 1 year. I think Nantucket will go back to these funders over and over again, as many municipalities in Massachusetts already do.
Thank you, Trevor. Matt, you had an additional comment?
I was going to ask a similar question. What does Trevor think? The other question, but the other thing I would ask is, one of the priorities is a zoning issue. And for two questions, does the amount of money we have, is it meaningful? Is it a big enough amount? Is it meaningful enough, to get started on downtown? Because I think we all agree that's the priority. And number two is, if not you guys or soon, who does the zoning work? Who does, what's the best way for us to do that? I see that being a hole that we may have here that we can't fill. And I think some of, I always look at it as, before we retreat, we have to stop going forward, and so how do we do that? I think we need some help on that. So when and how do we do that?
Okay, I think that's a good point, but in the interest of time today, what I'd like to do is ask for a motion to direct Arcadis to assist the town with a grant application to advance the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. Do I have that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, that was Fritz and Gary. I'll take one as a primary and one as a second. Any further discussion on that specific motion? Matt?
I would like my second question answered on how, before I vote on it. I would like the second question of how are we going to address the zoning issues, which are just are crucial as well. You know, is this the time or is that later, or I'm just sort of.
Yeah, Fritz, you're a member of the planning board. Can you address that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to how we're going to do it. I will, my comment would be, I think we're going to need some external support to get that done. I'm not sure. I'll just say it that way.
Thank you, Fritz. I would note that I don't know how Arcadis could help us write a grant application to get zoning done. Perhaps that's misunderstanding your question, Matt, but the question of how do we get zoning done doesn't appear to me to apply to the question that we have on the floor.
And I agree with you, Mary. I'm agreeing on the grant application aspect, but if we need to ask for money to bring in a specialist, if Arcadis doesn't have it themselves to do, sort of do the zoning work that we're going to need, do we need a grant application to get someone in to do that? I think the reason I'm asking this at this point, selling the barrier in downtown, et cetera, is going to be an easy sale, to the public, to the staff, to everybody. That's going to be relatively easy. Selling the idea that we may not be able to build out every lot along the coast as densely as possible, et cetera, that's going to be a very difficult thing. And so I look at, I'm just sort of saying, when and how do we start that process? That might be harder for us to get traction on.
Right. So again, we have a motion on the floor. Trevor, you may have a comment on this motion. Would you go ahead?
Actually, I just wanted to, I don't want to send us down a tangent, but I think for Matt and Fritz, I'd be happy to sit down and have a conversation, I think at a separate time on kind of next steps on that particular set of recommendations. I agree. Those are, very important and impactful to be paying attention to and moving forward. We can have that separate conversation another time as well.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay, I'm going to call for the vote on the motion. Gary Beller?
Aye.
Sarah Boyce?
Aye.
Peter Brace?
Aye.
Matt Fee?
Aye.
Ian Golding?
Aye.
Jen Carberg?
Aye.
Fritz McClure? Joanna Roach?
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all for that unanimous vote. Okay, so I am paying attention to the questions that have been raised, and I will try and shape future agendas to help us deal with those. And certainly, I think Vince has told us that he knows that we need to move forward on all of these approaches. So I hope that everybody will be satisfied as things unfold. Trevor, did you have an additional comment, or is your hand up from last time? Okay. Next item on our agenda, discussion of the adoption of the coastal resilience plan by the select board expected on January 12th. The only point I had there was already brought up, and that is the quarterly progress reports after the adoption. And also, of course, just to note that we are hopeful and expecting the adoption tomorrow night. That all of our plans moving forward sort of depend on that. Is there any other comment that anyone has? Also, Vince did not receive a number of responses for people planning to attend the select board that would indicate a quorum of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. So we have not posted a meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for tomorrow. Just to keep that in mind, that we're not at this time expecting all of us to comment on the Coastal Resilience Plan tomorrow at the select board meeting. That would cause a bit of an issue if we were all there talking. Any other comments here, Gary?
Just a question for Vince. One of the reasons the select board decided not to make a decision when they had it before them the last time is they said people from the town may, some of the town administrators may want to ask Vince or you about specific questions about the CRP. Have you had any of those conversations in the past 2 or 3 weeks?
What the question was kind of around taking it to other departments is how I took it. And I ended up contacting FinCom and Capcom, the members of both of their boards. And just for inclusion, I put Mary on the email just so that she could see what was going on. So I've now been invited to speak at FinCom on the 27th. That meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, Joanna, it's from 4 to 6 p.m. I've got 20 minutes with whatever time is needed for questions afterwards. So yeah, I've also, I think, resent it to the select board as well, and tried to make it as publicly available as possible, but I've had limited questions.
Yeah, and just noting it was over the holiday break, and Vince took a much deserved and I'm sure needed vacation as well. So, but yeah, so he did advance that on that request. Any other comments or questions about tomorrow night's select board meeting to adopt the coastal resilience plan? All right, seeing none. We do have some news from the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge. They are repeating their survey from last year. Vince, did you want to put that up on the screen? They were generous and contacted Vince and me to offer us space for some questions specific to the coastal resilience plan. And that was a sort of a short turnaround. So we do have some questions that we created. I'm not seeing those on the screen yet. Vince, are you able to share?
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay. So we had a very short turnaround time on this. I think I got the email a day or two before Christmas, New Year's Eve. So I got to it when I came back. They were looking for something by the end of last week or yesterday. So I quickly put together a few things. Mary did some terrific top quality editing over the weekend, improved on the questions. I had them just as yes or no. She changed them to grading from strongly agree to strongly disagree on a 5-point scale that you can see here for 2 questions. I then had a very brief and very quick conversation with Claire Martin at Remain yesterday to fix one of the questions. So I'm just going to go over them super quick so everyone can see them or at least hear them. Question 1 is I was given space for 2 to 4 questions and I used all 4. That just put that out there. Have you read or reviewed the Nantucket Coastal Resilience Plan by the town of Nantucket? That's a simple yes or no. Do you agree with the town of Nantucket's policy to prepare for approximately 9 feet of sea level rise by 2100? And Mary changed that from yes or no to a scale, and that was a very wise choice. Then question 3 and 4 have changed order since yesterday. I initially had wanted to put all 40 recommendations in there. Then having chatted to Claire yesterday and understanding how much space they'd have available, question 3 ended up becoming the 18 priority 1 recommendations that Mary read out earlier as well. So I'm going to save time by saying that's already in the record. So this is then, there's the 18 recommendations and people get to pick 3 and it's their opinion of what is most needed. There's also a link to the CRP up here as well. Originally, I had that as question 4. Remain thought it was better to reorganize that and have that as question 3. And I am very sorry. And I would love to see if I could maybe rejig question 4 a bit because Matt had a great phrase earlier. My question 4 was, would you be in favor of creating a new funding model to pay for necessary municipal projects to alleviate some of the impacts from sea level rise? Matt had a phrase, it was like community funding or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Stabilization Fund for Coastal Resilience.
Yeah. If I know that they were actually going to be discussing this and finalizing their questions this morning. If it's not too late, I'd like to try and change that because that phrasing from Matt was much better than the words "a new funding model."
Yeah, I would agree. I wasn't sure what a new funding model would refer to, so it was hard to know if I agreed or disagreed with it, but it would be good to be specific there. Fritz, you have a comment?
Yes, just make sure that people understand what stabilization fund means.
So we'll need to find out because I couldn't explain it.
Yeah, basically a stabilization fund is you put the money aside and you can only take it out with a vote of town meeting. So if we have, it's one of the places, if we have free cash, which is, we raised more money than we thought we were going to run, we were going to raise, then the free cash can go into stabilization funds, or it can be spent on certain things in the next year or in that year. But I think that the stabilization fund, I'm not sure if we want to have that's a good question because that's, directly going to, that improves that question because I had the same question you had, Mary, because it says a new model what's the model? You know, if it's all in the tax base, I say, no, I don't think that's a good model. If it's like some people gaining benefit or paying some of it and we're doing it in a different manner, you know, sustainable way, yeah, that's a good model. So
I also have a question about wording, Vince. Would we want to say impacts from climate change rather than impacts from sea level rise? Because sea level rise is very specific.
Well, so I could make this a tiny bit more specific, because the town is using the original phrasing of this question was the town using the NOAA high, and that got edited out. And the NOAA high is 9.25 feet. So I said approximately 9 feet. That's where that came from. But if you want to
No,
broaden it out,
I'm referring to question 4, not question 2.
oh, I beg your pardon.
So alleviate some of the impacts from, and rather than saying sea level rise, which would exclude storms, for instance, could we say climate change there?
I don't mind.
And that would also, yeah, that would widen the pool of uses from the stabilization fund, now that we're talking about a specific pool that, you know, it could address many things, which I think would be helpful.
maybe to improve number 4, maybe you should say something like, would you be in favor of, you know, yearly override to create a community resilience fund? Something along, would you be willing to put money, what I'm trying to say is, would you be willing to put money aside now to get ready for the expenses we're going to be paying in the future?
So perhaps if we say, would you be in favor of funding a community resilience stabilization?
There you go.
Yeah. So not just creating it, but putting the money in, funding it.
Yeah.
Funding, developing, any better word?
I think funding is the word we're looking for, is put your money where your mouth is question.
Okay. Funding A. Okay, so I'm just putting in bold what the changes have been. And this is all under the context that Remain haven't set their questions and are going to accept this.
Do we need to say what funding would, do we need to reference that to basically town funds? And I just want to make sure people understand what we're talking about. We don't think they're not thinking we're going to create some, you know, separate land bank or something like that.
So would you be in favor of the town funding a coastal community resilience stabilization fund? So we would start in town before.
Yeah.
Okay, I've had my hand up and
Go ahead.
I want to actually interrupt. I think this is a classic example of a committee designing a camel, and that we were better off leaving it the way it was, the way it was phrased the first time. This is, you know, just asking, it's like laying the groundwork, I would say, for going forward to maybe an idea like an annual town meeting, having a warrant article that we put together as a committee, asking for a percentage the same way that the land bank is funded, you know. So I think it's getting much too specific personally. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I would like to see it as question 3, because question 4 is the most complicated. And so I would prefer that it would lead into question 4. But I'm very worried that question 4 right now is getting over-egged, and that's my point of view. Thank you for letting me interrupt.
No, thank you, and I appreciate the perspective. So Vince, what are we trying to find out from the question, and how would we use the results? That's always what you want to ask whenever you're designing a survey.
Yeah, well, this is an opinion survey.
Great.
So, and this is only giving us the opportunity. I really hope that we still have the option, if Remain haven't set the questions yet. I'm just going to say that again. So hopefully this isn't for naught. Because if they've already accepted the question, and it seems like Ian's already okay with that question, I can't offer any more changes because it's their survey and we're only getting...
I don't think we'll lose anything. The question is, you know, can we get a useful outcome?
Yeah, fair point. So
so please, that's exactly my point, Mary. We want a useful outcome. And so I think question 4, the way it was phrased initially, was one that everyone could grasp and I would hope, would say strongly agree. And then focusing on the nuts and bolts of how to actually do it is something that we would do going forward after this opinion poll. Thank you.
I don't think we need a vote on this, but maybe a simple show of hands on version 1 and version 2, version 2 being on screen.
Well, again, as you said, ultimately Remain has the control of these. These are our suggestions to them. I would like to hear if people think that asking the specific question that we've designed on screen is more useful than asking a general question. I think Ian does have a point about, sort of putting the cart before the horse. If it turns out that for some reason a stabilization fund is not the right vehicle or is not available to us, then we haven't gained any knowledge by asking a specific question about that. Matt?
I think Ian is right. Just let it go the way it is. And then, people are it's pretty loose. I think we're so close to it that we say, well, what does that really mean? You and I, Mary, are like, I can't, but I think most people will probably say, yeah, we need to figure out a model. And then we're going to be back to square one anyway, but that's fine. I think his point is well taken.
Thank you, Matt. Joanna?
I think having the stabilization fund word in there is going to be very confusing for most people, period. Unless you're going to put a definition right next to it, because no one's going to understand what that means.
Okay, thank you. And Jen?
Thank you, Mary. Is it possible to, within this survey, and I don't know how Remain is setting it up, that people can actually write in text or comment as opposed to just strongly agree, disagree? Because I think that would help in whatever the number is for the stabilization fund question, the monetary question. Are you in favor, of a new funding model, and how would you fund it? If you agree, how do you see this happen? You could just have a text box and ask and see what kind of feedback impact you get. I would also, if possible, want a comment box to go with number 2, because if people are disagreeing with that, I'd really be interested in seeing if there was a justification piece there in people's minds, because that would go towards what further education we might need to put out there.
Okay, Sarah, and we are coming up on noon, so we're going to cut this off pretty soon.
Yeah, mine is just a really quick comment for number 4. I think it really doesn't matter what we say, that we're not going to really use the information to inform it. It's almost like sometimes when you do a survey, the questions you're asked are laying the groundwork for people to start thinking about it, right? So if people say, so if I looked at this, I would say, and I wasn't part of this group, I would probably either say yes immediately, because yes, you're kind of saying like we need to fund it, or you just say, I would skip the question because I'm like, I don't know what this is, so I don't agree to it. I don't think we should wordsmith the heck out of it, because this is like the first time it's been suggested. And while we all kind of generally think it's a good idea, it's not, like to Ian's point, we haven't like brought it to town meeting yet. It's not a real plan that we're asking for public input on. This is going to be part of a large survey that Remain is putting together. So kind of just putting it back into perspective, what are we going to do with the information? So I kind of think it doesn't matter either way, but it's a nice way to kind of let the public go, oh yeah, we're going to need to think about creative ways to fund this. But I completely agree with Jen. Having comments is really important, especially when there's a kind of basically a yes, no, even though there's a yes, it's a scale, but having some kind of comment is important.
Thank you, Sarah. Vince, I'm going to suggest that we go with the original version of question 4 rather than getting specific. I have to agree with the comments that people said that it's not going to add to the value of what we're trying to do.
I do have to say thanks to the committee for putting so much thought and effort into this, and I feel responsible because I really just liked Matt's phrasing of Community Resilience Stabilization Fund, and like has been said, I overanalyzed. I just thought that was great.
Okay, Vince, you'll take those and continue working with Remain, and hopefully they'll be able to accommodate this. And I did already send them a note of thank you for thinking of us and use this opportunity. it, I hope, will be very useful. Moving on, I'm going to pass over new business, discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. So I did have a conversation with Erica over email. We will continue meeting remotely through April 1st, which is when the current authorization for remote meetings expires. So pending some change in the state's authorization, we would have to go back to in-person meetings in April. Vince, was there anything you wanted to add? And did anybody else have anything they wanted to add under new business?
No,
Committee.
I'm good.
Okay.
I covered the one thing I wanted, which is to say that I'm going to FinCom on the 27th.
Yeah. Right, Gary?
I just had one general comment. You know, I regularly watch the HDC. I watch the Conservation Committee meetings. Last night I watched the Planning Board. And I'm always disappointed when I watch these meetings. It's maybe something that happens that I'm not aware of, because I rarely see them following the advice that the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee said, which is to consider rising tides and storm surge, you know, in their decisions. I keep seeing, even last night, they were talking about the Planning Board about the dolphin court thing. And there wasn't one mention of the fact that putting a pool on Eastern Street and North Beach Street, it floods every 2 years. I watched the flood. I watched the water in the community. I didn't see one comment about the fact that putting a pool in, and maybe that gets to Matt's point about we need zoning changes, because I didn't see that the Conservation Commission, when they put a pool on 26 Eastern Street, and I keep watching these things. I'm waiting to hear them focus on what we and the Select Board has said they must consider in their decisions, but I never hear it, and I'm always disappointed about it.
Gary, to that point, I read the Planning Board's agenda for that, and the staff report did mention the frequency of flooding in that area and did require stormwater management plans, which they had sought to have that requirement waived. So I did see that the Planning Board was taking into account the recommendation of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, not specific to a pool. And I don't think that Concom would necessarily have any jurisdiction there if it's not within their, I think it's 100 feet from a resource area. I don't know. But I just wanted to say that, yes, I did see that. Fritz?
I just want to respond to Gary that we've continued that to the next meeting. And I promise you that I will raise the pool issue at the next meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's not Mrs. Bell, my wife, the president of the Grand Point Association. She's going to be on that call too.
You're right. I mean, just to follow up, when there was that interesting discussion about what they're doing with the foundations and the buildings, and the comment didn't escape me that the engineer basically said, we're designing this to FEMA standards. Which means current FEMA standards, not something,
Right.
not what was in our recommendation. And so
Yep.
I think my comment would be, I think so far as the building department, the town, other things, I think the question of what our recommendation was, I think our recommendation is just totally gone by them.
I'm sad to agree with you.
Ian, and just keeping in mind, this is in the realm of new business. If we want to start
Right.
discussing topics, depth, yeah.
I'll absolutely bring it up at our next Concom meeting, Gary. But we've been trying to change our regulations for years. And so right now, we don't have anything specifically about, you know, forbidding pools in a flood zone area. And it's, of course, you're making a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And, you know, perhaps that's something that we bring up as a topic as we talk about zoning and such. I think we do need to have that on a future agenda.
Right.
All right, I did skip over public comment. Are there members of the public that have a comment before we adjourn? And you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and let me know if you do have a comment. All right, our upcoming meeting is January 25th. We will see you all Tuesday at 10 o'clock on Zoom. And I'll take a motion to adjourn, not seeing any public comment.
So move.
Second.
Thank
Before you
you.
go for the vote, Mary, I just want to say best of luck to Matt tomorrow night on the vote.
And I am planning to attend, and I think Vince is as well. So hopefully, if there are any questions, we'll be able to address them. Okay, roll call vote on adjournment. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mary. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Safe.
Bye.
Stay
Thanks,
safe.
everyone.
Stay safe, especially you folks in Nantucket.
Yep.
We're here in Palm Beach, okay?
Oh, Palm Beach must be lovely. I'm just going to end the recording, Mary.
At least you're
70
warm,
degrees.
Gary.
Stay warm,
Yeah.
folks.